please rise as you are able for the reading of the gospel. But in those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branches become tender and put forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about that day or hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Beware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on the watch. Therefore, keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening or at midnight or at cockcrow or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake. The word of the Lord.
Pray with me. God, in this season of waiting and expectation and preparation, we remember that you came, and we remember that you are here among us. In molecules and atoms, in smiles, in tears, in heartbreak, in joy, meet us here. May the meditations of all of our hearts and may my words be your words. Amen. A few months ago, my daughter Evelyn and I were practicing volleyball in the church gym. And I should say that my wife Jenny is the real athlete in our family. She played college level volleyball for 4 years. And since the true master was not available, Evelyn was stuck with me. And we were practicing underhand serves. And she was struggling with getting the power and the accuracy to make it over the net. And after a few adjustments, a few encouraging words, she kind of got into a groove, and one just sailed perfectly over. And I said, "Oh, that was poetic." And she said, "What?" I said, "Poetic." "Poetic?" Yeah, I mean, it was so beautiful that if I tried to describe it, words would come short. I would have to write a poem to describe that serve. And she said, "Okay." And I thought about that a lot since, and there's something that I just had to express. So here is my poem about Evelyn's serve over the volleyball net. Wouldn't that be awful? Everyone's squirming in their seats. Please do not read that poem to us. I didn't even write it because I am not a poet. I do not read much poetry, and sometimes song lyrics just go over my head for years until they finally click. So why, you ask? Why would I suggest at our staff meeting that we focus on the poetry of Isaiah in the Advent text? Why would I suggest that we do this poetry of hope for our Advent season? And one reason is probably because I'm stupid. The second, but I think more importantly, is perhaps God wanted me to confront me with this truth that hope is poetic. That hope is poetic. And by that I mean the source of hope, the conviction of hope, the peace of hope, the experience of hope, and the determination of hope is so beautiful, so mysterious, inward and outward, that it can't quite be put into words. If you like a poem, or if you like song lyrics, or if the backing track of a song really resonates with you, then you know that feeling, right? You know that feeling, and you can't describe it. And if you try to describe it, it will lose some of its shine, right? So imagine having a bad day, nothing has gone right, and then blasting the song that matches your mood or your need. Imagine that feeling, that gut response after listening. Imagine that shift in perspective. Imagine that kind of squink moment. Imagine that lightness of being, as some have called it. Descriptive words don't quite get there, right? That shift in perspective is hard to pin down. It's hard to explain, and which is what I mean when I say it's poetic. It happens, but it's hard to describe. Hope is poetic. It has more to do with the internal sense of connectivity than with external facts or future outcomes. One author calls it mystical hope. So allow me one more musing on poetry. Years ago, one of my seminary teachers was describing biblical theology this way. So much of the Bible is like a poem, pointing toward truth. But too often we take the poem, we strap it to a chair, and we try to beat the truth out of it. And this is me talking now. If you want to read the opposite of poetry, read some systematic theology. Read a biblical commentary. That story of a poem strapped to a chair highlights my point and the problem, because so often we want the facts of truth minus the vessel of the truth. We want to focus, we want the facts, rather, that will give us hope without the trials, without the endurance, without the courage, and that poetic squink where hope lives. I think comparisons are helpful, and so I'll say this, paraphrasing a friend: hope is not mechanical. Hope is not transactional. Hope is organic. Hope is poetic. I'll try to describe how others have tried to describe it later on, but it's important that I tell you outright, but that I won't be boiling it down to facts. I'm sorry, but hope is not available for digital download. The odd thing about hope is most people who experience hope on a deep level find it when their worst fears have been realized. Hope, it has been said, is what comes when a broken heart is willing to be mended. We just heard from the prophet Isaiah, and he's writing in a particular context. The Israelites, his people, have been through trial after trial, war, failed kings, exile, the temple burned to the ground, returning to the land, trying to rebuild. And in this context of trial, the poet Isaiah, on behalf of the people, has some big questions for God, and chief among them, where are you? Oh, that you would rend open the heavens and come down. And it's interesting that that word rend behind the Hebrew language is that same word for people in biblical times who would tear their garments in grief. Oh, that you would tear open the heavens, rip your heavenly garment, and grieve with us. And for you Swifties out there, you Taylor Swift fans, it's almost like that song, Tears Ricochet. I want my tears to become your tears. And one of the poet's more spectacular theological accusations, he writes, "But you were angry, and we sinned. Because you hid yourself We transgressed. And the theologian asks, well, how does the hiddenness of God work? It's one of those chicken or the egg kind of things. Is God responsible for sin and failure because God was hidden? But as a poetic lament and treated as poetry, the reader who has experienced tragedy says, yeah, that's right. You tell him. If we pull back and we see that in this section of Isaiah, the poet is really just trying to square God's tangible acts in the past with God's absence in the present. When you did awesome deeds that we did not expect, you came down, the mountains quaked. Where are you? And one author calls the style of poetry pain-seeking understanding. And I'm not so sure that the rationale here is airtight when this is the motivator. I don't think the rationale here has to be airtight when this is the motivator, pain-seeking understanding, because the poet is free to express the subject of the poem, God, is not a snowflake. And I'm not so sure we can be eased from pain until we try to describe the pain. Perhaps this Advent, your pain needs to seek understanding. So again, just kind of waxing on these hopefully poetic, hopefully helpful images. Consider this image, this word play, and I'm borrowing again. Consider the word clearing. Clearing is a noun. A clearing is a place. A clearing is that place absent of trees or high foliage. You can stand in a clearing and you can see more broadly, you can see more clearly. But a clearing is also a verb. A clearing is what happens to make a place into a clearing. What is the process where all the foliage has been removed? Who is the actor in that process? You? Others? Tragedy? God? The devil? Is a clearing happening to you this season? Do you need to arrive at a clearing and see more broadly? I dare say the poet Isaiah arrives at a clearing in verse 8. A shift takes place in verse 8. And I think this is where hope lives. And it is one word, yet. In Hebrew, yet is more appropriately, but now. But now shifts the focus from the past and into the eternal present in which God dwells. Pain, failure, confession, theological frustration have all been expressed, but now. And on this simple phrase, the poem shifts. God becomes the subject. God, who was hidden and absent and angry, is now imagined as Father and pottery maker. What's so frustrating is that the poem gives no rationale for why. Why this shift? But I'm convinced that this but now is the shift, the turn, the clearing where hope is sourced and grows and flows. This shift is poetic. It eludes precise description. But Isaiah is not the only one who has experienced it. A friend lent me this book, Mystical Hope, and in it the author makes 3 claims. First, hope is not tied to a good outcome in the future. Second, hope is more related to presence, not gifts, presence, than the future. It's like being met and held in communion by something intimately at hand, but now. And third, once this shift happens, to make the first 2 possible, then hope flows outward with strength and joy and this sense of satisfaction. There's a lot there, obviously. But I want to read her description of her experience, that poetic moment where hope began for her. I want to just let her words breathe like a poem. I don't want to beat the truth out of it. Her friend, her partner in ministry, a monk named Rafe, has died. And 6 weeks later, she walks past her former home, where she did so much of her work along with Rafe. And this home is being gutted by the new owners, and trinkets and mementos of her life adjacent to Rafe are now strewn in the snow, and she is overcome with grief and hopelessness. And she writes, "After the demolition derby had ended for the day, I sat down on the snowy deck of that old place and gave in to tears. Everything seemed hopeless. Rafe was gone, my life was gone, and now even the memories were being ripped apart. And then the most extraordinary thing happened. As I sat out there shivering with cold and lost in my misery, suddenly, from my toes up, I could feel a strange lightness and joy start to bubble up in my being, almost like an empty glass being filled with champagne. It was not a mood shift, but a distinct physical sensation. There was an effervescence inside me that simply had not been there the moment before, as if I had been recharged, filled, and fueled with an energy so light and buoyant that I simply could not sink even if I wanted to. Like Habakkuk, I found myself suddenly scooped up on the heights, and soon even my feet were dancing. Nothing had changed in the physical world. This place was still on the chopping block. What had been destroyed in the melee was still gone for good, and no force in heaven or earth was going to bring Rafe back into his physical body. And yet, for several minutes, the experience lasted, and none of this really mattered. I was above it all, my being coming to me from some far deeper place. It happens. Humans find this place in the ashes. And I dare say that the eternally present God meets them there. The eternally present God is eternally flowing through all creation, and sometimes humans can ride that current. It's kind of like a shift in one's experience of space and time, a shift where God does not need to come down because God is already immanently and eternally present. God is flowing through everything. But now, hope comes from the experience, the realization, the clearing place, and the process where one is swept into the flow of the current. And having realized that poetic hope, a person can choose to live and act with charity and joy and satisfaction. I'm making a conscious choice here, and it is so hard. I'm consciously choosing not to precisely describe the process here. The truth is, I don't know that I've really experienced it, and if I had, I don't know that I could describe it to you, but it happens. Hope is poetic. In a moment, Jack is going to read Isaiah's poem to us once again. And as he reads this first Sunday of Advent, dwell on this. While it is true, as we boldly claim at Christmas that God has come down in the incarnation of Christ, it is also true that prior to this and even now, God was and is already among us. The incarnation flows out of the flow that God has been flowing throughout eternity, and that flow is still flowing now, but now.
Would that you tore open the heavens, came down, that the mountain melted before you, as fire catches in brushwood, as fire makes water seethe, to let your name be known to your foes, before you nations quake. When you did fearsome things we had not hoped for, you came down, and before you the mountains melted. They never had seen. They never gave ear. No eye has seen a God besides you. He acts for those who wait for him. You struck him who delights in doing justice, who recalls you in your ways. Look, you raged, and so we offended. When you hid yourself, we transgressed. We become, all of us, like an unclean thing, and like a filthy rag, all our merits. And we, all of us, shriveled like leaves, and our crimes bore us off like the wind, and none called your name, nor roused himself to hold fast to you, for you hid your face from us, and gave us over to our crimes. But now, Lord, you are our Father. We are the clay, and you are the potter, and your handiwork, all of us are. Do not, O Lord, be so furious, and do not forever recall crime. Oh, look, pray to your people, all of us, all of us.